My name is Renata Voss. I'm 46 years old. I've spent 22 years as a certified fraud examiner, tracing stolen money through banks that thought their systems were airtight. And on the morning of my double mastectomy, I lay on a gurney in pre-op holding, staring at two empty plastic chairs, while my parents sat in the gallery of a golf tournament 40 minutes away, watching my younger brother tee off. The nurse asked if I wanted her to try my emergency contacts again. I said no. I already knew what the voicemail would say before I heard it. But here's what I didn't know yet. The surgeon scheduled to open my chest that morning had a name I recognized from somewhere I couldn't place. And when she walked into that pre-op room, looked at my chart, and said my last name out loud, her whole face changed. "Voss," she said slowly. "Any relation to Harold and Diane Voss?" I told her they were my parents. She set my chart down on the rolling tray, and for just a second, before she caught herself and put her clinical face back on, I watched something harden behind her eyes. "I need to ask you something before we go back," she said. "And I promise you, by the end of today, it's going to matter more than the surgery." Welcome back to Gia Mom Stories, where mothers and daughters share the moments that tested everything they'd built, and the quiet precision that carried them through. If this hits close to home, subscribe and drop a comment. Stay with me, because this one gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets a kind of better you won't see coming. My name is Renata Voss. Certified fraud examiner, licensed in the state of Ohio, 22 years in the field. I spent the first 12 years at a regional insurance carrier out of Columbus, chasing false claims, staged car accidents, inflated fire damage, workers who filed for back injuries while posting vacation photos from ziplining trips in Costa Rica. The last 10 years I've run my own practice, contracted out to law firms, small banks, and family trusts that suspect something is wrong but don't know how to prove it. People think fraud examination is dramatic. It isn't. It's patient. It's a woman in a cardigan with 3 monitors, cross-referencing bank statements against calendars against receipts, looking for the one number that doesn't belong. I built cases that put men in prison for embezzling $400,000 from nonprofits nobody had ever heard of. I've traced a stolen inheritance through 11 shell accounts in 3 states. I don't get emotional about numbers. Numbers don't lie. People do. My job, for 2 decades, has been catching the difference. I got into this line of work almost by accident. I studied accounting at Ohio State because it seemed practical, not because I loved it, and I took my first job out of college processing routine claims for a regional insurance carrier, the kind of job where you stamp approvals on broken windshields and water-damaged basements and go home at 5 without thinking twice about any of it. Then, in my 3rd year, a supervisor handed me a workers' compensation file that felt wrong the moment I opened it. A warehouse employee claiming a permanent back injury, unable to lift more than 10 pounds, collecting disability payments for 14 months. I noticed something small first. The handwriting on 3 separate doctor's notes, submitted months apart, had the same slight rightward slant in the letter T, as if they'd all been filled out in a single sitting. I pulled the man's gym membership records with a subpoena. He'd been benching 220 pounds twice a week the entire time he was collecting checks. That case put him in front of a judge, and it put something in me that never turned off again. I went back to school at night for my certified fraud examiner credential. I learned to read bank statements the way some people read novels, looking for the sentence that doesn't belong, the transaction that's grammatically correct but structurally wrong. Over 12 years at that carrier, I built a reputation as the adjuster nobody wanted investigating their claim, because I didn't stop at the first plausible explanation. I kept going until the numbers either matched the story or they didn't. When I opened my own practice, I told myself I wanted more control over my caseload, more say in which files I took. That was true. But underneath it, I think I wanted something else too. I wanted to be the person families and small businesses called when something felt wrong and nobody believed them yet. I have sat across tables from women 20 years older than me, widows mostly, who suspected a nephew or a business partner was quietly draining an account, and who had been told by everyone around them that they were imagining it, that they should just trust family. I built careers proving those women right. I never once imagined I would be the woman across the table from herself, telling myself the same thing everyone else had been told to say. Just trust family. I never once thought I'd need those skills on my own family. I grew up in Willow Creek, Ohio, a town of about 6,000 people, 40 minutes outside Columbus. My father, Harold Voss, worked 31 years as a claims adjuster for a mid-size insurance company before he retired. My mother, Diane, taught third grade at Willow Creek Elementary for 26 years. On paper, we were an ordinary Midwestern family. Modest brick house on Larkspur Lane. Sunday dinners. A minivan that smelled like string cheese wrappers well into my teenage years. I have one sibling. My brother, Tyler, is 4 years younger than me. And from the time Tyler was 7 years old and my father put a cut-down 7-iron in his hands at the Willow Creek public course, our family had exactly one center of gravity, and it wasn't me. I don't say that with self-pity. I say it because it's a fact, and facts are the only thing I trust completely. I was the responsible one. I got good grades without anyone hovering over me. I did my homework at the kitchen table while my mother graded spelling tests. Nobody worried about Renata. Renata handled herself. That became the entire architecture of my childhood. Not being a problem was its own kind of invisibility, and I didn't understand until much later how completely that invisibility would be used against me. Tyler was different. Tyler was gifted, and my parents knew it before he did. By 9, he was beating grown men at the Willow Creek Golf Club on weekend leagues. By 13, he had a private coach 2 hours away in Dublin, Ohio, driving lessons every Tuesday and Thursday after school. By 16, he'd won 2 state junior championships, and my father had NPM business cards printed up that said Harold Voss, player representative, underneath a photo of Tyler mid-swing. Golf is not a cheap sport. I understood that even as a teenager doing my own math at the kitchen table while my parents did theirs in hushed voices in the next room. Private coaching runs anywhere from $80 to $200 an hour. Tournament travel, entry fees, equipment, a proper set of custom-fitted clubs. By the time Tyler turned 18, my parents had poured what I estimated, even then, to be well over $100,000 into his golf career. I never asked where all of it came from. My father managed money for a living. I assumed he managed ours the same careful way. I remember specific moments from those years the way you remember bruises, small and precise and oddly permanent. I was 17, a junior in high school, and I'd made the state finals for a debate competition in Cleveland, 3 hours north. I asked my parents if one of them could come. My father told me Tyler had a junior tour qualifier that same weekend and my mother needed to be there to manage his diet and hydration schedule, and could I maybe get a ride with my debate coach instead? I did. I placed second in the state. I told my parents over dinner 2 days later, and my mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," while looking at a printout of Tyler's swing analysis spread across the table. I don't think either of them ever asked to see my trophy. It's still in a box in my closet, I think, wrapped in the same tissue paper the school gave me the day I won it. I want to be fair, because fairness is the entire discipline of my profession, and I try to bring it home with me even when it costs me something. My parents were not cruel people. They never once told me, in so many words, that Tyler mattered more. They would have been horrified by the accusation. But the evidence of a family, like the evidence of a fraud, isn't in what people say about their intentions. It's in where the money goes, where the calendar clears, where the attention lands without anyone having to ask for it twice. By every metric I know how to measure, my brother's swing mattered more than my grades, my debate trophies, my acceptance into Ohio State's honors program, my entire adult career. I made peace with that a long time ago, or told myself I had. It turns out you can tell yourself you've made peace with something for 20 years and still feel the old wound open clean when the right pressure finds it. I want to introduce someone important here, because he matters to everything that happened later. My grandfather, Walter Voss, my father's father, was a tool and die maker who spent 40 years at a manufacturing plant in Mansfield, Ohio, and quietly built a portfolio worth just under $600,000 by the time he died. Walter was not a flashy man. He drove the same Buick for 18 years and clipped coupons out of habit even after he didn't need to. But Walter believed, fiercely, in fairness between his grandchildren. When Walter passed away, I was 26. Tyler was 22. Walter's will established something called the Voss Grandchildren's Trust, a fund split precisely, legally, and irrevocably 50-50 between me and Tyler, to be used, per the trust language, for education, medical necessity, or major life establishment. My father, as the surviving son, was named trustee. It was meant to be simple. Walter had even told me himself, the last time I saw him in the hospital, holding my hand with fingers that still had grease stains worked permanently into the creases. Split down the middle, Rennie. No favorites in my money. Your father knows that. I trusted my father to honor that. For 20 years, I never checked. That's the sentence I keep coming back to, the one that still makes my stomach drop even now. 22 years finding other people's hidden fraud, and I never once opened the one file that was sitting in my own family the entire time. Tyler, meanwhile, kept playing. He didn't turn pro, he wasn't quite good enough for that, and by his late 20s, even he seemed to understand it, but he never fully let go either. He worked part-time at a sporting goods store in Dublin and spent every spare dollar and every spare hour chasing amateur tournaments, mid-am circuits, qualifying rounds for events that might, maybe, someday, open a door. My parents never stopped believing that door was one tournament away. Every conversation with my mother eventually circled back to Tyler's latest swing coach, Tyler's latest qualifying score, Tyler's latest near miss. I don't think Tyler is a bad person. I want to say that plainly, because it would be easy, telling a story like this, to paint him as a villain riding on money he knew was stolen, and that isn't the truth, and I don't deal in anything that isn't the truth. Tyler grew up inside the same family I did, just on the other side of its attention. He never asked to be the center of it. He was 7 years old when my father put that cut-down iron in his hands, too young to understand that a gift could come with a cost someone else would quietly pay for decades. By the time he was old enough to understand where the money in his life came from, it had simply always been there, the way water is always there for a fish, invisible because it's the only thing you've ever swum in. I've had to remind myself of that, more than once, in the months since all of this came out. Anger is easy to aim at the person standing closest to you. It's harder, and more accurate, to aim it at the person who built the whole arrangement in the first place. I built my career. I got married at 29 to a good, steady man named Marcus, a civil engineer, and we bought a house in Grandview Heights. We didn't have children, that wasn't in the cards for us, for reasons that are their own story, and I threw myself into my work instead, the way some people throw themselves into raising kids. I was good at it. I was, by any measure that matters to me, successful. I told myself that was enough, That I didn't need my parents at the center of my life the way Tyler needed them at the center of his. I told myself a lot of things, it turns out, that weren't quite true. 14 months ago, at a routine mammogram, they found something in my left breast. Then something in my right. 2 separate primary tumors, caught early, the kind of early that oncologists call the good kind of bad news. My surgeon at the time recommended a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction. Survivable. Manageable. But major. 8 hours under anesthesia. A hospital stay of 2 to 4 days. A recovery of 6 to 8 weeks where I would not be able to lift my arms above my shoulders, dress myself, or drive. I called my mother the night I got the diagnosis. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, the same way I used to sit as a kid finishing homework, and I told her I had cancer. She was quiet for a long moment. "Oh, honey," she said. "That's okay. Okay. We'll figure it out. When's the surgery?" I told her I didn't know yet. She told me to keep her posted. Then, within the same breath, she mentioned that Tyler had just qualified for the Ohio State Mid-Amateur Championship, a 4-day regional tournament that, if he placed in the top 3, would put him in the field for a national qualifier the following spring. She sounded more animated talking about Tyler's tea time than she had about my diagnosis. I noted it. "I want to be honest with you, 22 years of professional pattern recognition doesn't turn off just because the pattern is your own mother." I noted it, filed it, and told myself I was being unfair, that people process bad news in strange ways, that grief makes people talk about safe things instead of scary ones. I gave her the benefit of the doubt because that's what daughters do. That's what daughters have always done in my family. We give the benefit of the doubt until there's no doubt left to give. My surgery was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March, at Mount Carmel West Hospital in Columbus. I told my parents the date 6 weeks in advance. I told them the time, check-in at 6 a.m., surgery beginning at 8. I told them how long it would take, how long I'd be in recovery, and that Marcus would be there but that I would very much like my mother in that waiting room too. I am not a woman who asks for things easily. 22 years of being the responsible one who didn't need anything had trained that out of me. But I asked. I said the words out loud. "Mom, I need you there." She said, "Of course, honey. We'll be there." I should tell you what else was on the calendar that Thursday. The Ohio State Mid-Amateur Championship, final round, same morning, 90 minutes southeast at a course called Muirfield Village Satellite Grounds. Tyler had made the cut. He was 3 shots off the lead going into the final 18 holes. My father had already told 3 separate cousins on the family group chat that this was the tournament that could change everything for Ty. I found out 10 days before my surgery that they hadn't told me the truth. It was Marcus who found it, actually, scrolling through Facebook one night while I sat next to him on the couch, my post-surgery hospital bag already half-packed on our bedroom floor. He went very still, and then he turned the phone toward me without a word. It was a post from my mother's account, from 3 weeks earlier, before she'd even confirmed to me that they'd be at the hospital. A photo of Tyler in his golf polo, my father's arm around his shoulder, both of them grinning in front of a leaderboard. The caption read, "So proud of our boy heading into the biggest tournament of his life. Nothing is going to make us miss this one." Wouldn't be anywhere else, Thursday morning, cheering him on. Thursday morning. My surgery date. Posted publicly, to 240 friends, 3 weeks before either of them ever told me they might not come. I sat very still on that couch for a long time. Marcus asked if I wanted him to say something to them. I told him no. I told him I needed to think. That's the moment, if you're asking me to point to one, where the fraud examiner in me quietly opened a file. Not consciously, not with any plan yet. But something in the back of my mind, the part of me trained over 2 decades to notice when the story people tell you doesn't match the story the evidence tells, clicked into place and started paying attention in a different way. I called my mother the next day and asked her directly. "Mom, is there any chance you and Dad aren't going to make it Thursday?" There was a long pause. Then she said, carefully, the way you'd explain something to a child, "Honey, we didn't want to worry you before we knew for sure, but Tyler's tournament is that same morning. Final round. And you know how important this one is for him. We were hoping maybe we could visit you that evening instead? Once you're settled in your room." I asked her if she understood that I was having both breasts removed that morning. I asked her if she understood that I would be waking up from 8 hours of anesthesia with no one in that room but my husband. I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at my mother in 46 years, and I wasn't about to start over the phone. She said, "Renata, please don't make this a competition between you and your brother. This isn't about love. It's about timing. Tyler only gets one shot at this. You'll have other doctor's appointments." Other doctor's appointments. That's what she called a bilateral mastectomy. I hung up the phone, sat down at my desk, the same desk where I built case files against embezzlers and fraudsters for 22 years, and for the first time in my adult life, I let myself really look at my family the way I look at a client's file. Not as their daughter. As an examiner. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop. 10 days is not a lot of time to build a case. But 10 days is exactly how long I had before I went under anesthesia, not knowing whether my own parents would be in the building, and I have never in my career let a short timeline stop me from being thorough. I called Dana Whitfield, my former research assistant from my insurance days, now an independent forensic accountant I trust with anything. I told her I needed a favor, off the books, and I told her why. "Renata," she said, "are you sure you want to do this the same week as your surgery?" "I need to know what I'm walking into," I told her. "If I'm going to lie on that table alone, I at least want to understand why." Dana pulled public trust filings from the Franklin County Probate Court. My grandfather's estate had gone through probate there, and the trust document itself, while not fully public, had enough referenced filings and annual accounting requirements attached to court records that a trained researcher could establish a baseline. I pulled our joint family bank history myself, going back through old paper statements my mother had, for whatever reason, stored in a filing cabinet in the guest room closet that I had access to from years of helping them organize taxes. What I found, in those 10 days, was only the beginning. But it was enough to make my hands shake while I sat behind my own desk at 11 o'clock at night, 3 days before surgery, staring at a spreadsheet. The Voss Grandchildren's Trust, established by my grandfather Walter, had an initial value of $587,000, split into 2 equal sub-accounts of $293,500 each, one designated for me, one designated for Tyler. Under the trust terms, my father, as trustee, was required to file an annual accounting with the beneficiaries. I had never once received one. Not once in 20 years. I had never asked, because I had never needed to touch my portion, and because I trusted, the way you trust a father, without a second thought, that my share was sitting exactly where it was supposed to be, growing quietly, waiting for the day I might need it. Dana's preliminary pull of the probate-linked filings showed something troubling immediately. The initial accounting, filed the year after my grandfather's death, listed both sub-accounts at their correct starting balances. But there had been no further public accounting filed in 19 years, which itself was a red flag. Trustees are required by Ohio law to provide beneficiaries with periodic accountings, and either my father had been filing them directly to us and we'd simply never registered how significant they were, or he had been quietly, consistently, not filing them at all. Counting on the fact that neither Tyler nor I had ever thought to ask. I want to be precise here because precision is the only thing that has ever protected me. I did not, in those 10 days before surgery, have the full picture. I had a starting balance, a troubling gap in reporting, and a folder of old bank statements with several transfers I couldn't yet explain. I had enough to know something was wrong. I did not yet have enough to know how wrong. Dana and I worked mostly at night that week. After Marcus had gone to bed, the two of us on a video call with our respective monitors glowing in otherwise dark rooms 3 miles apart. Dana has a particular way of talking through a spreadsheet, almost like she's narrating a nature documentary, calm and matter of fact even when the numbers are ugly. Okay, she'd say, so here's a 6,200 transfer in June of that year, memo line just says travel. And 3 days later there's a charge at a golf resort in Hilton Head under a name I'm betting is a coach or an agent. She'd pause. You want me to keep pulling the thread or do you want to stop for tonight? I always wanted her to keep pulling the thread. I have never once, in 22 years, wanted to stop pulling a thread once I could see it was attached to something. By the 4th night, we had a working timeline stretching back 19 years. Built entirely from documents I had physical access to and public filings Dana could legally access, careful the entire time to stay inside the boundaries of what either of us could ethically pull without a court order. I want to say clearly, for anyone watching this who might find themselves doing the same thing one day, I did not access anything I wasn't legally entitled to as a beneficiary of that trust. Every document either came from records already in my possession or from filings any member of the public could request. I built cases against strangers for 2 decades under exactly those rules. I wasn't going to break them building a case against my own father, no matter how much easier it might have been to look the other way on that point, too. I made a decision that week that I still think about. I decided not to confront my parents before my surgery. Partly because I didn't have the full case yet, and I have never in 22 years walked into a confrontation without the complete file in hand. But partly, if I'm honest with you the way I'd want a mother watching this to be honest with herself, because some small, stubborn, hopeful part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation. That maybe I was wrong. That maybe, on Thursday morning, my parents would walk through those hospital doors after all, and none of this would matter. They didn't. Thursday morning, 5:40 a.m. Marcus drove me to Mount Carmel West in the dark, the heater running, neither of us saying much. I checked in at the front desk, changed into a gown the color of a robin's egg, and sat in a pre-op bay with N4 taped to the back of my hand while nurses moved around me with the calm, practiced rhythm of people who do this every single day. I watched the door. I want to tell you I didn't, that I was strong and unaffected and above hoping, but that would be a lie, and I don't deal in those. I watched that curtain every time it moved, right up until the anesthesiologist came in to talk me through the sedation plan, and my parents never came through it. At 6:50 a.m., 10 minutes before I was due to be wheeled back, I called my mother's cell phone one last time. It went to voicemail. I texted her, "They're taking me back soon. I could really use you here." No reply. At 7:15, my father texted back a single line, "Tyler's tea time got moved up, we're at the course already, so proud of him, we'll come see you tonight. Sending love, sweetheart." Sending love, sweetheart. 90 minutes before they wheeled me into an operating room to have both my breasts removed, that was the message my father sent instead of walking through a door. That's when the nurse came in to do my final chart review, glanced down, and said the surgeon assigned to my case that morning would be Dr. Naomi Castellano, a name I didn't recognize from my referral packet because my original surgeon had a family emergency the week prior and the practice had reassigned me without much fanfare. Dr. Castellano walked in 15 minutes later, chart in hand, and everything after that moment felt like it was happening to someone else. She introduced herself, ran through the standard pre-op checklist, confirmed my identity, my date of birth, the surgical site markings the resident had drawn on my chest that morning. Routine, professional, kind but brisk, exactly what you'd want from a surgeon about to spend 8 hours with her hands inside your body. Then she glanced at the chart cover sheet, and I watched her pause. "Boss," she said, mostly to herself. Then, looking up at me directly. "Any relation to a Harold and Diane Voss, out of Willow Creek?" I told her they were my parents. Something moved behind her eyes, controlled, professional, but unmistakable. She set the chart down on the rolling tray beside my bed. "I need to ask you something before we go back," she said. "It's a little unusual, and I want to be upfront that it has nothing to do with your surgery today, which is going to go exactly the way it's supposed to. But I think, once you're recovered, it's going to matter to you. A lot." I told her my parents weren't coming. I don't know why I said it, maybe because it was sitting right at the surface of me that morning, ready to spill out to anyone who asked me the smallest question. She looked at the empty chairs in the corner of the bay, then back at me, and something in her expression softened into something that looked almost like recognition, like a puzzle piece sliding into place that she hadn't expected to find that morning. "My father was an estate attorney here in Columbus for almost 40 years, she said. "Walter Grady Castellano. He handled trust litigation, probate disputes, that kind of thing. He passed away 3 years ago, and I inherited some of his old case files, not the confidential ones, obviously, but his private notes, the ones he kept for himself about cases that bothered him. He kept a running list, over the years, of families he worried about. Trustees he thought were mismanaging things and getting away with it because nobody was watching closely enough. There was a name on that list I recognized the second I saw it on your chart this morning. Harold Voss." I asked her what she meant. "I don't know the specifics," she said. "I want to be honest with you. I was a teenager when my dad was working these cases, and most of what I know is from notes in a shoebox, not courtroom transcripts. But I remember him mentioning a trust fund out of Willow Creek, a father managing money for 2 kids, and my dad being frustrated that one of the beneficiaries, a daughter, I think, never asked any questions, so there was nothing anyone outside the family could legally do. He used to say that was the hardest kind of fraud to stop. Not the kind people hide well. The kind nobody ever checks." She looked at me for a long moment. "I have to go scrubbing soon," she said. "But I wanted you to know that before you go back. Because it sounds to me like today might not be the only thing you need to look into once you're healed." They wheeled me back at 7:58 a.m. I don't remember much after that, the mask, the count backward from 10, the particular fluorescent hum of an operating room ceiling. I remember thinking, right at the edge of consciousness, that my grandfather Walter had tried to warn someone about this, decades ago, and that someone had finally, accidentally, gotten the warning to me. I woke up in recovery at 1:40 in the afternoon. Marcus was there, holding my hand, his eyes red. My parents were not. They arrived that evening, just after 7, exactly as promised, carrying a bouquet of grocery store carnations and a story about how close Tyler had come, 3rd place, 1 shot out of qualifying for nationals, so proud, Renata, you should have seen his final putt. My mother kissed my forehead. My father patted my foot through the blanket. Neither of them asked how the surgery had gone until I brought it up myself. I said very little that night. I was exhausted, medicated, sore in a way that made speaking difficult. But I remember lying there after they left, staring at the ceiling tile, and thinking about Dr. Castellano's face when she said my father's name. I thought about the shoebox of an old estate attorney's private worries. I thought about 20 years of never asking a single question about $293,500 that was legally mine. I decided, right there in that hospital bed, that as soon as I could sit up straight and hold a phone without my chest screaming, I was going to open the file for real. The 2 days I spent in the hospital after surgery were quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Marcus stayed both nights on a fold-out chair that didn't fold out particularly well, waking every few hours to check my drains, adjust my pillows, hand me water I could barely lift the cup to reach. A nurse named Priya, who'd clearly clocked the empty visitor chairs on the first day, started stopping by more often than her rounds strictly required, sitting with me for 5 minutes at a time just to talk about nothing, a television show, the weather, whether the hospital cafeteria's soup was worth the walk. I didn't tell her why my parents weren't there. I don't think I needed to. Some kindnesses don't require an explanation to be offered, and I've tried, in the months since, to remember that particular gift and pass it along wherever I can. Stay with me, because the next 6 weeks of my recovery weren't just physical. Recovery from a bilateral mastectomy is slow. I couldn't lift my arms above shoulder height for nearly a month. I couldn't drive for 3 weeks. Marcus took 2 weeks off work to help me shower, dress, and manage the drains taped to my sides. It was, by any measure, the most physically vulnerable I had ever been in my adult life. And it was during that vulnerability, propped up in bed with a laptop balanced on a pillow because I couldn't hold it any other way, that I began, slowly and methodically, to build the most important case file of my career. I called Dana back the week after my surgery and told her I needed everything, properly this time, done right, done thoroughly. She agreed, and for the next 5 weeks, we worked in parallel, her pulling every public and semi-public record she could access, me working the parts only a family member could access, going through decades of documents my parents had never thought to lock away because they never imagined I'd look. Dana's first find, 3 weeks in, was the trust's original annual accountings, the ones my father had actually filed with the Franklin County Probate Court in the first 4 years after my grandfather's death, filings required by Ohio law that, after year 4, simply stopped. In those first 4 years, the pattern was clean. Both sub-accounts, mine and Tyler's, grew modestly and identically, invested in the same conservative mutual fund my grandfather had specified in his will. Then, in year 5, the year I turned 31 and Tyler turned 27, the filings stopped entirely. No further public accountings, for 14 straight years, which under Ohio trust law is a serious breach of fiduciary duty, but one that almost never gets caught unless a beneficiary specifically petitions the court to compel an accounting. Nobody ever did. Nobody ever had a reason to. I trusted my father. That's what trust does. It makes you stop checking, and when you stop checking, you stop seeing. My own contribution to the file came from the guest room filing cabinet, 11 years of old joint bank statements my mother had saved out of some paper hoarding habit she'd never broken, statements from an account labeled Voss Family Trust Disbursement, an account I had never once heard mentioned by name in my entire life. I photographed every page on my phone, propping my elbow on a pillow because lifting my arm still hurt, and sent them to Dana in batches. What emerged, over those 5 weeks, was a pattern so consistent it was almost elegant, in the terrible way fraud sometimes is. Every single year, beginning the year the public filing stopped, my father had transferred funds out of the joint sub-account structure and into a general Voss Family Trust disbursement account that he alone controlled. From there, the money split into 2 directions. A small, steady portion, never more than $4,000 or $5,000 a year, went toward what looked like legitimate, if modest, distribution split evenly enough between R&T and his handwritten ledger notes to maintain the appearance of fairness, mostly small birthday and holiday transfers I remembered receiving and never questioning. But the vast majority, year after year, went toward line items labeled things like T golf coaching, T tournament travel, T equipment, T entry fees. 14 years of it. I sat with my laptop balanced on a pillow, tallying line by line, the same way I've tallied stolen invoices for strangers 100 times before, and by the time I finished, the number sitting in front of me was 187,400. That was how much of my half of the trust, my grandfather's money, specifically and legally designated for me, had been redirected, without my knowledge or consent, to fund my brother's amateur golf career over 14 years. My remaining balance, according to the last internal ledger entry Dana and I could locate, dated 8 months earlier, stood at 46,100. Out of an original 293,500 that should have grown, conservatively invested over 20 years, to somewhere well north of 500,000. I sat with that number for a long time. Not crying, not yet. The fraud examiner in me needed the number confirmed and cross-referenced before I let myself feel anything about it. But underneath the calm, something in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery had cracked wide open. I called Dana that night. I need you to double-check every single figure, I told her. I need this airtight before I do anything with it. Renata, she said, it already is. I've cross-referenced every transfer against the bank's own records 3 times. This isn't a maybe. This is documented, dated, and it's yours whenever you're ready. I want to tell you what happened next wasn't about revenge. I'd built enough fraud cases in 22 years to know the difference between someone who wants justice and someone who wants to hurt people, and I was very careful, in those weeks, to stay on the right side of that line, even while every part of me that had been 16 years old at a kitchen table doing homework alone wanted to scream. I reached out to an elder and family trust attorney named Priscilla Ames, a woman I'd worked opposite on 2 prior fraud cases and trusted completely. I brought her everything, the probate filings, the disbursement ledgers, the bank statements, 14 years of line items. She read through it in her office over the course of an hour and a half while I sat across from her, healed enough by then to sit upright without wincing. Renata, she said, closing the final folder, this is textbook breach of fiduciary duty. Your father had a legal obligation to manage that trust impartially, in the interest of both beneficiaries equally. What you've documented here is a sustained, deliberate diversion of your portion of the trust to benefit your brother, disguised through a disbursement account that never should have existed under the original trust language. You could petition the court to remove him as trustee today. You could sue for restitution of the full amount, plus interest, plus potentially punitive damages given the duration and the pattern of concealment. I don't want to sue my father, I told her. Then let's talk about what you do want, she said. What I wanted, I realized, sitting in that office, was not a courtroom. It was the truth, spoken out loud, in a room my parents couldn't leave for a golf tournament, in front of the one person whose entire life had been quietly funded by money that was never really his to have. I also, by then, had one more piece of the file I hadn't expected. Dr. Castellano's mention of her father's old notes had stayed with me through my entire recovery, and once I was steady enough to make the drive, I visited her office under the pretense of a routine follow-up and asked, carefully, if she'd be willing to share anything more specific her father had left behind. She hesitated. Client confidentiality even in death is complicated, but she did, eventually, locate one page from her father's private shoebox notes, undated but clearly old, that read simply, Voss Trust, Herald Uncooperative Re, Accounting Requests, Daughter are unaware, advised client grandfather, W. Voss to add stricter reporting language, client declined, trusted his son. She gave me a photograph of the page, not the original, but enough. My own grandfather, it turned out, had once been warned this exact thing might happen, and had chosen, out of love for his son, to trust him anyway. It broke my heart in a new direction entirely, but it also became page 1 of my case file, the origin point of everything that followed. 8 weeks after my surgery, fully healed, arms fully mobile again, I called my parents and asked them to come to dinner at my house. I told them it was a celebration, I was cleared by my oncologist, clean margins, no further treatment needed, and I wanted the whole family there, Tyler included. I made a roast. I set the table with the good plates Marcus and I had gotten as a wedding gift, the ones we almost never used. I laid the case file, 106 pages, tabbed and numbered the way I've tabbed and numbered every serious file of my professional life, inside a leather folio, and I set it on the side table by the door where I'd see it every time I walked past, a private countdown only I could read. Priscilla Ames sat 2 doors down at a coffee shop, on call, in case I needed her. My friend Dana sat at my kitchen counter under the guise of helping me cook. There is a witness, the way you keep a second set of eyes on any audit that matters. I had learned, over 22 years, that you never present a case alone if you can help it. Not because you doubt yourself. Because the people you're presenting it to will doubt you, and it helps enormously to have someone in the room who watched you build it from the ground up. My parents arrived at 6. My father kissed my cheek and said the roast smelled wonderful. My mother hugged me and told me how well I looked, how relieved she was that everything had gone so smoothly. Tyler came separately, straight from a late round at the club, still in his golf polo, cheerful, oblivious, thanking me for having him over. We ate. Small talk moved around the table the way it always does before something breaks it, Tyler's upcoming qualifier next spring, my mother's 3rd grade class putting on a spring play, my father's blood pressure medication needing an adjustment. I watched all 3 of them the way I watch a subject across an interview table, relaxed on the surface, gathering everything underneath. When the plates were cleared, I asked Tyler and my parents to stay seated. I brought the leather folio in from the side table and set it down next to the empty roasting pan. I want to talk about the Voss grandchildren's trust, I said. My father's fork, still in his hand, went still in midair. Grandpa Walter left Tyler and me an equal trust when he passed. $293,500 each. Dad, you were named trustee, with a legal obligation to manage both halves fairly and to file an annual accounting with each of us. I opened the folio to the first tab. You filed those accountings for 4 years. Then you stopped. For 14 years, you never told either of us anything about the state of our trust. My mother said, Renata, honey, what is this about? It's about $187,400, I said, and I opened the second tab, laying the ledger summary flat on the table. The years and line items highlighted the way I've highlighted stolen invoices for strangers my entire career. That's how much of my half of the trust was transferred, over 14 years, into an account labeled Voss Family Trust Disbursement. And that's how much of it went toward line items marked T golf coaching, T tournament travel, T equipment, T entry fees. The table went silent. Tyler's face had gone pale, his eyes moving from the papers to my father and back again. Dad, Tyler said quietly, what is she talking about? My father set his fork down completely. Renata, it wasn't like that. It was going to even out. I always meant to make it right, once Tyler's career took off, once there was sponsorship money, once. Once what, Dad? I kept my voice level, the way I always do in a confrontation, because raised voices give people an excuse to focus on the emotion instead of the evidence. Once I needed it? Because I needed it 8 weeks ago. I needed access to money for a surgery that saved my life, and instead I was lying on an operating table with an empty chair in the corner because you were 40 minutes away at a golf tournament that you funded with money that was legally mine. My mother started to cry. We didn't know you'd need the money for the surgery, we thought your insurance. That's not the point, Mom, I said, and for the first time, I let my voice sharpen, just slightly, just enough. The point is you didn't come. You chose Tyler's tournament over my surgery, on a morning when, unknown to any of us until an hour before I went under anesthesia, the surgeon operating on me recognized our last name from her late father's old case notes about a trustee who wouldn't answer his own daughter's questions. Grandpa Walter tried to protect me from this 20 years ago, Dad. His own attorney warned him. And Grandpa trusted you anyway. I turned to the third tab. Priscilla Ames, my attorney, is 2 doors down right now, on call. I have 106 pages here. Probate filings. Bank ledgers. 14 years of documented transfers. This is a breach of fiduciary duty under Ohio law, and I have more than enough to petition the court to remove you as trustee and compel full restitution, with interest. My father's hands were shaking on the table. Renata, please. I'm your father. You are, I said. And I still love you. But loving you doesn't mean I'm going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm not asking you to go to prison, Dad. I'm asking you to make it right. Tyler pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. He was staring at his hands. Dad, is this true? Is any of this true? My father didn't answer. That silence was its own answer, and I watched something in Tyler break in real time. 20 years of believing his golf career had been built on family sacrifice and love, suddenly reframed as something built, in significant part, on money stolen from his own sister. I didn't know, Tyler said, his voice cracking. Renata, I swear to God, I didn't know any of this. I believe you, I told him, and I meant it. Tyler had never once asked where the money came from, the same way I'd never once asked either. We'd both simply trusted a father who managed money for a living, and trust, when it's misused this thoroughly, makes fools of everyone standing near it, not just its intended target. I laid out my terms the way I lay out settlement terms in every case I've ever built, because a case without terms is just an accusation, and I've never believed in accusations without a path forward. Here's what happens now, I said. 1. Full restitution of $187,400, plus statutory interest, calculated by Priscilla and independently verified by Dana, paid into a properly managed account in my name within 90 days. 2. You resign as trustee immediately, and a neutral third-party fiduciary, someone with no family connection, takes over management of what remains of both sub-accounts going forward, with mandatory annual accountings filed with the court, the way it always should have been. 3. Tyler's remaining trust balance stays exactly where it is. None of this is his fault, and I'm not going to punish him for what you did. And 4. I paused, and let it land the way I let every important clause land in every settlement I've ever built. You come to my next post-surgical follow-up appointment. In person. On time. So does Mom. Not because the surgery still needs you. Because I do, and it's long past time you both acted like that mattered as much as a golf tournament. Dana, still at the kitchen counter, hadn't said a word the entire time, exactly as we'd planned. Her role that evening wasn't to speak. It was to be a second set of eyes in the room, someone who could later corroborate, precisely and without bias, what was said and how it landed, the same role a witness plays in every serious confrontation I've ever built toward. She told me afterward that watching my father's face when I opened that folio was one of the hardest things she'd ever sat through quietly, and that she'd had to remind herself, twice, that her job that night was to observe, not to comfort anyone, not even me. My father, 71 years old, a man who had spent 31 years adjusting other people's insurance claims with meticulous professional care, sat at my dining table and put his face in his hands and wept. "I'll sign whatever you need," he said. "I'll pay it back. Renata, I am so sorry. I don't know when it stopped feeling like stealing. I think I told myself it was an investment in the family. I think I told myself so many times that I started to believe it." "I understand that you convinced yourself of something," I said. "But understanding it doesn't undo what it cost me." "Not the money, Dad. The money I can rebuild. It's 20 years of not being allowed to matter as much as Tyler's swing." My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling, and I let her take mine, because forgiveness and accountability, I've learned, are not mutually exclusive. You can hold someone's hand and still hand them 106 pages of evidence in the same evening. Before they left that night, my mother asked me one more question, quietly, standing in my front hallway with her coat half on. "Renata, if we hadn't skipped the surgery," she said, "would you ever have looked?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, because I owed her an honest answer even in that moment, maybe especially in that moment. "I don't know," I told her. "Maybe not for years. Maybe not ever." I trusted Dad completely. It took 2 empty chairs and a stranger with a shoebox of old notes to make me finally ask the question I should have asked 20 years ago. She nodded slowly, and I watched something settle into her face that looked almost like grief, the particular grief of realizing that the worst thing you ever did to your child might also, in some backward way, have been the thing that finally made her safe. "Tyler called me the morning after the dinner, before 8, his voice hoarse like he hadn't slept. 'I want to see everything,' he said. 'Not the summary. All of it. Every page.' I met him at a coffee shop near his apartment and spread the full case file across the table between us while his coffee went cold, exactly the way mine always does when I'm working. He read for almost an hour without saying much, just the occasional low sound in his throat when he recognized a specific tournament, a specific coach, a specific year he remembered as the best of his young life for reasons that had nothing to do, in his memory, with money. 'This one,' he said finally, tapping a line item from the year he'd turned 19. 'This was the summer I made it to the U.S. amateur qualifier.' Dad told everyone it was the proudest moment of his life. He looked up at me. I don't even know how to feel about a memory like that anymore. I told him he was allowed to feel more than one thing about it at once, proud of what he'd earned with his own hands and his own swing, and angry about how it had been paid for, both true at the same time, neither one canceling the other out. He said that helped, a little. I believed him. Priscilla drew up the restitution agreement within the week. My father, to his credit, once confronted with a fully documented case, didn't fight it. He'd spent 31 years in insurance, and he understood, better than most people would, exactly how solid the evidence against him was. He liquidated a portion of his own retirement savings and sold a boat he'd owned for 15 years to make the first $60,000 of restitution within 30 days. The remainder came over the following 2 payments, exactly as structured, exactly on schedule. Priscilla filed the trustee resignation with the Franklin County Probate Court, and a neutral fiduciary, a licensed trust company with no connection to our family, took over management of what remained of both sub-accounts, with the mandatory annual accountings finally, after 20 years, being filed the way Ohio law had always required. Tyler and I had a long conversation, just the 2 of us, a few weeks after that dinner, sitting on my back porch with 2 beers we barely touched. He told me he'd spent his whole life believing our parents simply loved him more, and that finding out part of that love had literally been funded by money stolen from me made him feel, in his words, like his entire golf career was standing on a foundation that wasn't real. I told him his talent was real, whatever the money situation had been. I told him I didn't blame him, not for a second, and that the only person responsible for this was the one who'd made the decision to divert it. It took time, but Tyler and I are closer now than we'd been since we were kids, closer, I think, than we ever were during all those years our parents kept us in separate lanes, one of us the responsible one of us the golden one, neither of us ever quite seeing each other clearly through all that separation. Tyler did something else, too, something nobody asked him to do. He went to my parents on his own, a few weeks after the restitution was finalized, and told them he wanted his own remaining trust balance moved under the same independent fiduciary managing mine, even though there was no legal reason for him to do it, his half had never been touched. I don't want to be the reason this family keeps score in secret anymore, he told me later, a little sheepish about it, like he thought I might tell him it was unnecessary. I didn't. I told him it was exactly the kind of decision that separates a person from the family patterns they were raised inside, and that I was proud of him for making it, the same way I meant it the first time I ever said those words to my little brother, decades ago, on a driving range I'd mostly forgotten until all of this brought it back. 6 weeks after the surgery, at my final post-operative appointment, Dr. Castellano checked my incisions, confirmed everything was healing exactly the way it should, and then, almost as an afterthought, asked how things had turned out with my family. I told her the short version, the trust, the restitution, the neutral fiduciary now filing the accountings her father had once tried to insist on decades earlier. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I've carried with me since. My dad used to tell me that the law can only protect people who ask it to. He spent 40 years watching families choose comfort over accounting, right up until comfort ran out. I'm glad yours finally asked. I told her I was glad too, and that I owed a piece of that to a shoebox she almost didn't think to mention to me on a random Thursday morning, 90 minutes before she saved my life in an entirely different way than she probably expected to that day. My parents did come to my next follow-up appointment. Both of them, in the waiting room, 45 minutes early. My mother has since started calling every single week, not about Tyler, about me, how I'm healing, how I'm sleeping, whether I need anything. It's not the 20 years back. It never will be. But it's something, and I've decided, at 46 years old, that something honestly offered is worth more than a lifetime of something owed and never paid. I still think about Dr. Castellano sometimes, and the strange, quiet accident of her father's old shoebox of worried notes finding its way to me on the exact morning I needed it most. I sent her a letter after everything was settled, thanking her, and she wrote back one line that I've kept taped inside my case file cabinet ever since. My dad used to say the fraud nobody stops is the fraud nobody's trained to look for. Sounds like you were exactly the right person to finally look. He was right, in a way none of us could have planned. 22 years of catching other people's hidden numbers, and it turned out the most important file of my career had been sitting inside my own family the entire time, waiting for the one morning I finally had a reason serious enough to open it. There's a coda to this that I think about more than almost anything else. 6 months after the restitution was fully paid, my father asked if he could take me to lunch, just the two of us, no folios, no Priscilla, no Dana. We went to a diner in Willow Creek we used to visit when I was a kid, back before Tyler's swing ever became the center of our family's gravity. He told me he'd spent the better part of his career at the insurance company teaching younger adjusters to spot exactly the kind of pattern I'd built against him, small, plausible, individually defensible transfers that only become indefensible once you line them all up in a row. I taught people to catch this for 31 years, he said, staring at his coffee. I never once thought I was the file. I think that's the scariest part of the whole thing, Rennie. Not that I did it. That I never saw myself doing it, the entire time I was doing it. I didn't have a tidy response to that. I'm not sure there is one. But I've thought about it since, and I think it's true of most fraud, the family kind most of all. Almost nobody sets out one day to steal from the people they love. They talk themselves, one reasonable sounding transfer at a time, into believing it isn't what it is, right up until someone finally lines up all the receipts and makes them look. I want to leave you with one more piece of this, because I think it's the part that matters most, more than the money, more than the confrontation, more even than the surgery itself. A few months ago, I finally unwrapped that debate trophy from the tissue paper in my closet, the one I won at 17 while my parents sat in the stands of a junior golf qualifier 3 hours away. I set it on a shelf in my home office, right next to my certified fraud examiner certificate, the one that's hung on every office wall I've had for 2 decades. I didn't do it to prove a point to anyone. My parents have never even seen it there. I did it because I realized, sitting with that trophy in my hands for the first time in nearly 30 years, that I had spent almost my entire adult life building a career around noticing what other people missed, and I had never once turned that same careful attention toward the small, quiet evidence of my own worth. The trophy had been sitting in that box the whole time, the same way the truth about the trust had been sitting in a filing cabinet the whole time. Some evidence doesn't need finding. It just needs someone willing, finally, to look. My name is Renata Voss. I've spent my career finding the money people think no one will ever trace. It took a hospital gurney, 2 empty chairs, and a stranger with her late father's old notes to make me finally look for it in my own life. If you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one nobody worried about, the one who learned to stop asking for things because no one ever seemed to notice when you needed them, I want you to hear this clearly. Being the one who doesn't cause problems is not the same as being the one who doesn't matter. Check your own numbers. Ask your own questions. The people who love you the right way will never be afraid of an honest accounting. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If it reminded you of a time you had to fight to be seen in your own family, drop a comment below and tell me about it. If you know someone who's always been the quiet, responsible one, the one nobody worried about, the one who learned to stop asking, send them this video today. That's the person who needs to hear this most, and she may be too used to going unnoticed to send it to herself. Subscribe to GM Mom Stories for more, and remember, the truth doesn't need you to raise your voice. It just needs you to finally open the file.